Hello, everyone. Welcome to CMO Therapy, a podcast that's hopefully going to help you navigate your way through your marketing journey. Because let me tell you, I get it. Being a marketing leader is no walk in the park. In each episode, we dive headfirst into the world of marketing, where uncertainty, tight budgets, and fierce competition are just beginning of the roller coaster ride. But guess what? You are not alone in this. Why go solo when you can tap into the powerhouse of insights from some of the most awesome marketing leaders in the game? And look, the title might include the word therapy, but we are not just talking about challenges here. We are tackling them head on. So join us as we deep dive into the nitty gritty, share war stories, and unlock secret strategies. And get ready for no holds barred conversations because sometimes I have no filter. So, if you are a chief marketing officer, a marketing lead, or someone just looking to up their marketing game, then I am so glad that you are here with us today. And I am so glad today to have with me the very awesome Ingrid Sierra. Ingrid, would you mind giving a little introduction to the audience, please?
And thank you very much for having me today. I'm very excited about these conversations. So my name is Ingrid Sierra. I'm French-British. I've been in the UK for 17 years and I currently work in a company called Zego. We are an insurtech based here in the UK and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, I'm sure. And my background is obviously, given how long I've been doing marketing, I've done a lot of it. I started in CRM in the telco space and I moved to retail and I did a lot of work in the loyalty space as well. So the topic of today is very close to my heart.
Good, good. This is nice to hear. We're going to have a very juicy discussion, I think, then. So the title of the podcast that we picked today is Out of Sight, Out of Mind, the real challenge of retention. Which I'm quite excited about because I don't think we've done anything. I haven't had any episodes that have purely focused on retention. So this is going to be exciting. We chose this title because we were talking about what happens after the sale when the contract is signed, when everybody stopped high-fiving, when the excitement fades, and especially in situations where the customers are barely thinking about you, once they've onboarded or, got that product in their hand, whatever it might be. So yeah, surprise, surprise, customers aren't thinking about our brand constantly. So we're going to be digging into why retention is so hard, especially in industries where customers don't interact, every single day. So where those kind of interaction tactics on a daily basis are not going to save you. So this episode is about building trust. It's about relevance. It's about how brands can earn the right to show up when there's no obvious reason to show up and knock on the door. So thinking about that then, let's start here. So why do you think it's so much harder to build a relationship with a customer after the sale than before it?
I'd say it's the same as every relationship. Like, it's so much harder to kind of make a friendship or a relationship with our partner last in the long term than that kind of very first phase where like everyone is looking their best and thinking about that kind of sale moment, right? And then the hard work starts like after that. And I think that's exactly the same with customers, to be fair, because before the sale, we have the attention of the customer because they are evaluating options, they are in the market for products, etc. So they're there listening to us and like absorbing everything we're telling them. And also it's about that kind of storytelling and talking about future promises. And then the sale happens and then it's time to deliver for the brand, but also in the customer's head, a lot of the time the problem is solved and they want to move on to the next thing, right? So their attention starts to drop massively for all the right reasons. And that's when as brands, we actually have to deliver on those promises we've made before that sale. So there's a little bit of like a conflicting like priority between the brand and the customer then. And also like businesses also focus a lot on acquisition, obviously, onboarding, but consistency after that is very important. And yeah, that's where we need to show up and the hard work starts.
Yeah, that's really it. I feel like what you said at the start about it being like a relationship. I use this analogy all the time to kind of explain buyer journeys or customer journeys. But I feel like this could be a different type of therapy session, Ingrid. But my I always say so my husband and I have been together. I'm going somewhere with this, don't worry. My husband and I have been together for 30 years, actually, for a long time. Everyone always says to me, wow, like, that's amazing, like how have you managed to kind of stay with the same person, with your husband for 30 years. And the reason I always give is that actually I don't feel like I've been with just one person for 30 years, like
Mm-hmm.
one persona, if I was going to use the marketing language. I feel like over the course of those 30 years we've changed, right? We've
Yeah.
kind of grown up together. I feel like I've been with about 4 or 5 different people. Like we've had to learn to sort of, to get to know and love each other again as we've moved through that relationship. So where I'm going with that is that's no different to a
Yeah.
customer relationship, right? Their needs and kind of pain points evolve, don't they?
100%. And like, I mean, yeah, you get married for like the good days, the bad days in health and all of that stuff. And like with a customer, it's the same, right? Like you're gonna have to be there as thinking about the insurance space, like when something bad happens and when you're gonna, and same as in a relationship, when you're gonna gain the trust is when you're actually gonna show up in those difficult moments and not just like, and in a 30 years relationship, it's a lot more about how you show up in those difficult moments than like taking someone on a date every week, right? So it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same.
That's really interesting. And I remember we were talking before, like you've worked for some really interesting brands when we were having the conversation before about this exact topic. And you brought up a really good point around some customers or some companies where they didn't actually win the customer themselves. So like in the situation with like telcos or insurance
Yeah,
marketplaces like Amazon, for example, they're a really, really great example. And John Lewis is another one, is a favorite of mine, where I feel like anything I buy for them, even if something was a little bit more, cost a little bit more, I would
yeah,
go through them because I know that the customer service is
yeah,
absolutely amazing. But yeah, what's your experience about customer
yeah.
mindset in that relationship?
Yeah, so it's true. I got that experience more recently in insurance and before in telco. And actually, often those sales are made, let's face it, based on pricing, right, than anything else at that point in time. And that's okay. But we just need to kind of start from that kind of very clear point. And I think sometimes we tend to try to kind of, when we start with like the welcoming journey or things like that, we try to kind of pretend that there's an emotional relationship there and an emotional connection, but actually there isn't in those cases. And I think we're trying a little bit too hard to pretend there is, and that's not what the customer is expecting because they've chosen you for price. So what they need is actually to be reassured that they've made the right choice because they got that price, but they're also going to get the service that they need for that price, right? And then it's a matter of like, just as we said before, showing up, delivering, being competent, being transparent, and having that kind of right experience throughout the journey, whether it's like a 12 months insurance policy, a 24 months mobile phone contract, or whatever that is, and really build that to make sure that the next time they're actually going to have had such a great experience throughout that journey that they're going to choose your brand rather than going to search for price again. And I think that's where the challenge sits, right? And you have that time frame to actually build that, and we call it retention because it is retention. But for me, when the initial purchase was not consciously about your brand and was because of pricing in that example, then the challenge is to make them choose you the next time. And I think if you don't think just about retention, that is very transactional, but about building that, starting that relationship so they choose you, then you're in a better place. And that goes with what we said, that experience that if it's obviously for all tech products, etc., the product has to work. That's the standard. The journey needs to be smooth. You need to be there when they have an issue. And then you need to create on top of that kind of flat layer of a smooth journey, you need to create a level of stickiness in that journey that is going to excite the customer and just not think like, okay, this is okay. And that goes with, and it could come in very different forms. It could be creating a community. It could be with rewards. It could be with some perks. It could be with like some surprise and delight. It could be with a lot of things. But I think, again, we shouldn't forget that the smooth experience is the minimum that is expected. But if we want them to choose us again, we need to add another layer to that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'd love to kind of dig into that a little bit more, like not to get like too kind of like tactical, but I think it's really, really important because yeah, you want to kind of stay relevant to them, but also there's a borderline of being annoying a little bit as well, isn't
Yeah,
there?
yeah,
Where
yeah, yeah.
just kind of spamming. I'll tell you who does it, who from my experience, who does it really well. There was a health insurance Vitality, which
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you might be aware of, and they have a number of kind of schemes that they offer as part of their sort of policy where you can, you know, get free coffees with, I think it's like Cafe Nero or something like that. And then they have another one where this is the kind of the sticky one where you can hook your kind of like Apple Watch up to them or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is,
Yeah,
your health app, and you can earn points based on the amount of
yeah,
kind of exercise that you do and
yeah,
things. So yeah, I mean, what's some other kind of examples of how people can
yeah.
be relevant without being annoying?
Yeah. So, and that example you have for health insurance actually is exactly what we are doing at Zego with car insurance and with telematics insurance, where basically you monitor your driving to get rewards in exchange of that. So that's a similar framework. But I'd say like basically it's about, to your point about being relevant and not annoying, you need to think about the customer first. And we sometimes like say we think about the customer first, but still in the framework of our agenda in terms of our calendar or brand agenda, etc. And it's really hard to reverse that. Like a lot harder, a lot easier said than done. But if you really think about it from like customer more, you are more likely to be relevant and avoid the kind of trap of becoming annoying, as you said. And that really means thinking deeply about providing value, obviously, educating the customer when there's a chance and a need to do that, being highly contextual with the information you provide. And in the case, for example, that perfect example of insurance is, for example, provide prevention. If you actually go to the customer, helping them, giving them tips and information, etc., about like how to not get to the point where they would have to make an insurance claim, whether it's home, health, or car, then you really add value that is relevant to your brand and helping the customer. So I think it's really a matter of finding like that kind of value add and accepting that they probably don't care that much because they have so much in their life, and again, like thinking that as like, if they don't care, what do I need to tell them so they will actually be interested in that and engage with it?
Sorry to interrupt, but I have a tiny ask while you sip that overpriced oat latte. If you're liking CMO Therapy, please hit that follow button and leave a quick rating. It takes 5 seconds tops and it keeps this marketing madness going. Okay, back to the good stuff. Yeah, I think it's a little thinking a little bit more holistically, isn't it? Like about
Yeah,
the life moments that are surrounding that thing, you know,
yeah,
the reason or the pain point that they brought you. I think about mortgages is always my classic kind of, you know,
yeah,
one that pops into my with my finance background. But you know, nobody ever really wants a mortgage. They want to buy a home.
yeah.
And if you rephrase it slightly like that, then oh my goodness, there's a world of kind of, you know, possibilities of where you can dip into their life without being annoying, saying they've
Exactly.
just got a mortgage, you know.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think financial products are a very interesting one, right? Rather than just telling you like I don't know, there's a new product that has like that percentage of return or whatever. Most people don't even understand, starting from like what is your objective, whether it's like to buy a home, to retire early, etc., is really gonna help like bring information that adds value to what your objective is. So I think we just need not to be too lazy as marketers and not see things throughout our lens, but really try to think about the customer. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a bit of a universal principle, but always applies.
And you know, when we do start thinking about the customer, I suppose back to kind of where I was kind of framing the discussion, like the introduction, is we get all excited, obviously, as part of that acquisition journey, and then when they first sign, and then suddenly we get kind of excited again when it comes to renewal time. But there's that big
Yeah,
kind of gap, isn't there, in the middle?
yeah,
So
yeah,
I think sometimes we get a little bit sort of lazy, don't we, with things like loyalty
yeah,
points, or you know, oh, that'll be fine. We'll just keep them loyal with
yeah,
points in the middle.
yeah.
Yeah, like how is that? How do you think that affects the journey in the middle? Like how are we losing them in the middle? What's the biggest
Yeah,
reasons?
that's a very good question. So before we come to that, actually, one thing that I've seen work before that really helped us focus when I was working for the car phone warehouse, the mobile phone retailer, is that we were measuring NPS at every single touch point in the journey. And it was so clear that your NPS is really high at just after the purchase, and then it stays high during that kind of onboarding welcoming phase, and then you have that kind of boring in life phase where it drops dramatically. And then when you manage to kind of get the customer to renew, then it goes back a little bit, but never to that kind of level where it was in the first place. And basically the one goal we had in everything customer marketing was to kind of keep that NPS as high as possible throughout that journey, because basically that's what maximizes your chances of renewal. And that makes life at that last phase less hard if you've kept that engagement going. So that down to your question about how you do that, it's difficult, right? Because that kind of, when there's low frequency, you need to kind of, again, find those moments. And I think what you talked about around rewards and loyalty and perks, whatever forms they take, actually have an impact. And I mean, I'm a bit biased because I've worked a lot in the loyalty space, but like everything you read about that has an impact. But the positive impact it has would never be offset by if they had a bad experience and trust is broken. So I think they have to work hand in hand. And back to what we were saying before, like you need to be there in the difficult moment. You need to provide that kind of great experience as like your must have, and then find what is going to work for those customers to kind of bring that extra layer of excitement and loyalty. And that is different. That is different from a business to another and for different type of customers. So a lot of the work I've been doing in the loyalty space was around gamifying experiences to kind of get engagement with a loyalty experience. And that means like having different mechanics, different type of rewards, etc. And when you study that gamification element, you realize that customers use different games or mechanics and rewards based on different core values that they have. So for some people, it would be about social recognition. So then what you need is to give them like a badge that they can share on social. For some people, it's about helping others. So you need to give them points that they can change for like charity donations. For some people, it's just about winning. So then you need to have a leaderboard so where they can play something or get something where they see their progress. And it goes on and on and on. There are a lot of those core values. But when you start to kind of understand that, obviously, you don't really know what is going to drive your exact customers. So it's a matter of finding an experience that is a mix of mechanics and perks that is going to have an engagement effect with different type of customers. And that could happen at different points in time. So yeah, that's a very, very interesting thing to work on.
It is. This is really, I love this. This is really exciting. So, and I hope you don't mind, I would love to pack into this a little, unpack this
Yeah,
a
of course.
little bit, because let me ask you then, right, where I'm going, where my thoughts are on this, when I was listening to what you were saying, is you were talking about like people, the individuals, and I was thinking in my head, there's often this discussion, isn't there, around B2B versus B2C and, you know, SaaS and, you know, everyone kind of likes to pretend that there are different ways of kind of serving customers in these ways. But at the end of the day, when I was listening to what you were saying, was you're talking about the individual's experience with whatever it is, whether it's a product or something tangible they've got in their hand, or whether it's a piece of software that they're using. So how do you what's the framework? Is there a framework that you would use? How do you dig into kind of how to establish what those value pieces are to the users?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because you always have that balance of like, I think things are different whether you're in B2B, B2C or SaaS. I'll come to that in a second. But at the end of the day, this is the same humans that interact with those brands, right? So for, obviously, if you think about like B2C and particularly like, I don't know, fashion, FMCG, etc., obviously everything is a lot more volatile and you have a matter of habit, you have a matter of memorability of brand, but also at the end of the day, there's the reality of like the availability, right? Like, I don't know, if I like Coke, but I go somewhere where there's only Pepsi, then I'm going to churn to Pepsi, but it's just a matter of availability, and we need to kind of take that into account when we look at those measurements about like which brands customers buy, etc., etc. Then in B2B, obviously, it's fundamentally different, right? Because like there's a lot more at stake than buying a can of Coke, and it's all about like customer service. It's got about the relationship you build with that brand, but also churning and retention comes with a much higher risk, because when you are in a business and you kind of make the call on switching, there's the pain of doing that, obviously, the fact that it might cost a lot of money and not necessarily work. And so there's an element of risk and fear, which again is completely different in the way you have to approach the relationship with the customer to make that retention happen. And in SaaS, it's another different thing where it's about usage, right? Retention is linked to usage. If people don't use the product, unless they're locked in like an unseen, like ongoing renewal, they're going to switch. So I think you have to understand these parameters first and then build on that things that basically use what we were saying before about those core values in different contexts. So where in B2B, for example, you wouldn't use the same mechanics as, I don't know, like the gamification of the Duolingo experience, you can also, if you realize that, and that's in a way, as you have the one-to-one relationship in B2B, you can dig a little bit more. And for example, realize that actually there's that element of risk that a customer, a prospect does as when they don't know if they want to switch. And then you kind of dig into that and unlock that. And that's, to be fair, that's what B2B salespeople are doing, right? In terms of understanding the needs, etc. So, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to the individuality. And yeah, we all have different reactions depending on who we are.
And I love that and you've hit the nail on the head. It's understanding that individual, and to do that, what you've got to do is keep in touch with them, don't you? So
yeah,
I think that's the thing. It doesn't have to be always a kind of an offer that you're giving them. It's just a kind of a touch point. So you said that kind of Carphone Warehouse that you were doing that NPS kind of like all the way through, not just like once a year. Did you like how did you do that? And how did you get people to respond to that midway through?
Yeah, and the challenge we had there actually was that also the minute customers would buy their contract through the retailer, then you would have like the Orange, Vodafone, or O2 taking over the relationship. And all those brands have their own loyalty programs. So if you add another loyalty program, branded loyalty program on top of that, you completely lose the customer, right? Because like they would be like, I have O2 priority and I have something else. So that's you create more confusion. So it was a matter of doing exactly what we were saying, right? Like in terms of like finding those moments and really add value and build that level of like education in terms of like, so there was a lot of content about the usage of the phone and everything around like roaming at the time. See, that was a while back, so things were a bit different, but like a lot of education around like roaming, and then depending on the phone you had, we tried to add value around that. And then there was like also and there was a lot of research done into that in terms of like understanding when customers would start to potentially look to renew, and really make sure like we did show up at that time to kind of obviously be with the customer on that journey. So it's a lot of like really understanding what matters to customers at which point, and we had that very clear timeline, and then showing up at those moments.
Yeah, I love that. I remember having a conversation years ago with a customer success leader, and he was telling me about the consumption gap, he called it. So when you buy, whether it's a product or a piece of technology, a solution or whatever, you buy it to solve a particular pain point that you have at that one time. But over time, as you're using that, over then the next year, you have other pains or other problems that you need to solve. You might then go and buy other solutions that solve those pains. But if those other solutions solve the pain of your product, when it comes to the end of renewal, that person could just keep the new one, the new solution that they bought, and get rid of yours, because that solution solves two pains, whereas yours only solved one. So what you've got to be doing all the time is looking at the consumption of your
Yeah.
product and thinking, how can we increase that and not create like a consumption gap? How can we constantly, I suppose another way of putting it is kind of upsell or cross sell to them, but
Yeah.
just making sure that they're using kind of everything within in the product that's available. Because again, I think
Yeah.
another stat is you only use like 5%, don't you, roughly on average of what the product can do.
Yeah. That's a very fair point, actually.
Yeah.
And I think that's one that is probably very important for SaaS as well, because like given the level of competition and sometimes similar solutions you have in the market, actually getting a customer to use your product as much as they can is probably the best prevention for churn, right? As we were saying, like for SaaS, retention is driven by usage, but usage comes with knowledge and that level of like updates, education on new features and all of that. But and then you have the added challenge of like very often like translating quite potential technical languages in clear customer benefit.
Yeah, yeah. I had a situation with it was car insurance recently where car insurance is another funny one. You know, you don't really want to be having your interactions with your car insurance, do you? Because it normally means that something has gone wrong and you've had a little bit of an accident or something. But it got to renewal time for me for my car insurance, and I was on the phone with them for about 40 minutes. 40 minutes. It was so painful trying to work out how we could get my quote down, because I'd get a quote that was much, much cheaper from other insurance companies. And in the end, they started to, it was I won't name the insurance company, but they were trying to get me to take out like the multiple products. They had a multi kind of policy discount that you got, so they were trying to get me to go through quotes of like my home insurance and maybe pet insurance and all of these things to see if I could just get my car insurance quote down. And 40 minutes, it was so frustrating, and they couldn't do it. And but then by now my experience with them, my relationship is gone, because not only have they kept me on the phone for 40 minutes, they've tried to sell loads of new stuff to me to do that, to keep me. I mean, it's just crazy.
Upsell should be done a little bit more subtly. I get that.
If if retention really is about kind of like building trust, as we keep saying, that's what it's basically about, isn't it? That journey all along there, you've got to build trust, and if you don't do anything in that funny middle piece, and you're staying quiet, and you're not doing anything to earn more trust, by the time it comes to renewal, your trust is very little. So what would you say is the biggest thing that marketing teams or marketing leaders can do to kind of earn that trust? Or maybe the other side of it, what are they doing wrong to what's the word, to the negative against the trust? You know what I mean? To not earn the trust.
Well, I think we've covered some of that, right? One would be, well, the obvious one, which is being completely silent, obviously. And I think the second one is to kind of map those interactions based on the brand's agenda rather than what matters to the customer. And really not understanding like their pain point, their needs, etc., at every different step of that journey. Starting and that obviously it takes a little bit more effort, but really starting from a point of view of mapping that. Really, one way I've seen it work quite well before actually is doing that kind of journey mapping with the customer need, the customer sentiment, and how it kind of fluctuates. Then look at what it is we're doing now. Then you usually clearly see a little bit of a gap. And then you kind of start listing like your jobs to be done to really respond to what the customer needs at each stage. And then you just build it and test it and evolve it.
And what would you say is the kind of the winning formula that you've seen there then? Or does it really depend per organization, like different organizations?
I think it massively depends. I think what you can duplicate is really the kind of the thinking and potentially like the way you so at the moment, I'm reusing some frameworks I've used before, but ultimately what you put in there is always fundamentally different depending on your market, your product, and your customers. So yeah.
It's just about having the right mix. Yeah, definitely.
It is a right, yeah, and also it's about like connecting the dots between like, so if you have an experience that is happening in app, for example, and then you have a contact center, and then you have all those kind of customer marketing comms that can happen across different channels, really mapping the three, not as like CS app customer marketing, but in parallel of one another, again, based on the customer at the top, then usually you realize that you might have even inconsistent like information or points of contacts, etc. And that's such a basic thing to do, but like when you look at it from the customer point of view, you really quickly realize where you need to put your effort.
That's really interesting, and like it kind of made me think about uh, we like you said at the start, like we put so much time and effort and thought into kind of the acquisition marketing part and creating lots of really kind of amazing content that sometimes it doesn't sometimes we don't put as much effort into the other side, into the retention. But surely, the customers that have come on board haven't always seen everything as part of that acquisition journey, so there's a lot that can be repurposed, right?
Yes, 100%. So that's interestingly, that's something you hear quite a lot, but I think is really true. We get bored of our campaigns and our messaging way, way, way faster than our customers. And actually, I honestly think we spend too much effort creating new content all the time rather than really digging into what the customer needs and what resonates at different points in time. So I'm all about like content repurposing and optimization throughout rather than just like creating more and more and more for the sake of it. Because and also you find that, I mean, repetition works, right? When you think about like the biggest brands, what's working is repeating the same messaging and like building those relationships based on that longevity. So if it has worked for KitKat, it can work for a lot of other people.
That's a good point, a really good point. And then, going back to kind of what we said at the start, where we use that kind of dating analogy. I use the dating analogy all the time to explain the kind of acquisition part, where when you don't tell someone that you love them on the first date, you don't jump in there straight away, and you have to kind of go through that sort of dating process first before you fully commit. But actually now I think I'm going to use my story about being with my husband for 30 years and the fact that you have to keep going through that dating process. It's not just a done deal when suddenly you get married. I think I'll continue to use that analogy as well.
Yeah, but back to what we were discussing about like if they choose you, I mean, that's not necessarily the case with relationships, but like if they choose you because of pricing, you need to make sure that at renewal they actually choose you for the right reasons. That's that I love you moment, right? Like it's like if it was an arranged marriage and they have to have like an exit opportunity, then you want to have built that kind of trust and emotional connection, so you choose to stay together.
So I have an example of this actually. I feel like we've done a lot of like brand mentions in this. I might have to ask for some sponsorship for this episode. But the platform that I use to record my podcast is actually, it's called Riverside, and there are other platforms out there as well. Just have to say, but yeah, Riverside. I must admit, when I first started doing my podcast, I actually got a subscription to Riverside, and they were doing like a special offer for the elevated package. So I got that, but I've loved it so much, and I've had a few instances where I have had to reach out to support, and they have been absolutely fantastic. They're so on it, they the way they respond, the timeliness of their response, everything's amazing. Using the software all the way through, everything, my whole experience for the the whole period was amazing. When it came to renewal time, I knew the renewal was in a certain month. I didn't even think about it. It didn't even occur to me to kind of go back to them and, maybe try and negotiate or anything. I knew that it was going to be an automatic renewal. I knew I was going to end up paying the full price, not the discounted price that I had when I originally signed up. But because I'd had that experience all the way through and those touch points, it like I say, it didn't occur to me.
That's, what? That's probably the perfect example that summarizes everything we've just said, right?
Yeah.
Because that's ultimately that's what we want. Yeah.
That's the dream.
But to make that happen, you have to show up every single time when the customer needs you, and yeah.
Show up with the product, show up with kind of communications, and show up when shit happens.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. Thank you so much. We've coming up to time, so I'm going to have to wrap up the conversation. But yeah, there's so many more things. If anyone has any questions, is it all right to reach out to you on
Of course.
LinkedIn or something like that?
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely.
Lovely. Thank you. I really enjoyed this topic. It's something a little bit different. Yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for listening.
Thank you.